A whisper drifted from behind the sealed door. Reed froze in place. Something inside him urged action, so he knocked. Silence answered. Leaning closer, he pressed his face to the wood. Movement stirred within, followed by a voice that quivered with desperation. "Help me. I'm begging you, open this door." Reed's boot slammed against the latch. Wood splintered, and the door swung wide. A wave of stale air and human suffering rushed toward him. There, bound to a central beam in the darkness, stood an Apache woman, powerful in build, her garments torn to shreds. Eyes like coal fixed on him with burning intensity. "Take me away from here," she choked out. "I'll give you anything. Future. Just don't leave me behind." Time seemed to pause. Reed's mind flooded with memories, his own family, their final cries for salvation, his failure to protect them. He drew his blade and severed her bindings. "We're leaving now." Voices erupted down the corridor. Reed grabbed her arm, and they bolted toward the rear exit, feet pounding across the crimson dirt yard. They leaped into his wagon as bullets sang past their heads. The whip cracked hard, wheels screaming against packed earth. The settlement shrank behind them, though angry shouts still rode the desert wind. In the wagon's bed, the woman gasped for air, hands shaking. But her gaze had transformed and no longer defeated. Now burning with fierce life, twilight descended, painting the wasteland in shades of blood. Reed tugged the reins, guiding them into a tight gorge. He understood their pursuers wouldn't dare push hard through darkness. "Down," he commanded, setting the brake. The woman called Takina studied him briefly before dismounting. Her fingers still clutched that weathered blade, posture rigid. Her arms showed defined strength beneath scarred skin. Reed secured the animals and gathered brittle wood for a modest blaze. Without speaking, he loosened his water flask and passed it over. She sipped carefully, watchful eyes never leaving him. Like a wild creature uncertain whether the figure before her meant safety or danger. Through dancing firelight, Reed met her stare. "You owe me nothing, and I won't send you back." Several heartbeats passed before she lowered herself near the flames, maintaining distance. Raw wounds circled her wrists where ropes had bitten deep. From his vest, Reed produced fresh fabric and extended it wordlessly. Hesitation flickered across her features, then she offered her injured arm. His movements were measured and tender as he wrapped the wounds. Takina held perfectly still, watching his weathered hands work. When finished, she acknowledged him with the smallest tilt of her head, gratitude unspoken. But her expression had eased. Darkness settled completely. Night insects sang, while wind murmured through canyon walls, mingling with the fire's gentle crackling. Reed settled against a wagon wheel, rifle across his thighs. Suddenly distant hoofbeats. His hand shot up for quiet as his boot smothered the flames. They flattened against the ground. Takina's warm breathing touched his sleeve. The riders passed along the ridge above, then vanished into the black. Certain of safety, Reed revived the fire. Takina remained motionless, though something had altered in her expression. The wariness had softened, replaced by the first traces of confidence. "Rest now," Reed said, tossing a heavy coat her direction. She wrapped it around her frame, settling on her side facing away, blade still gripped tight. Reed observed her powerful, broad silhouette, then leaned back once more, keeping vigil through the hours. For the first time in countless years, the empty desert night felt less hollow. 3 days later, the heavens opened without warning. Desert rains came seldom, but when they arrived, they fell in violent curtains, hammering the parched soil with tremendous force. Reed was protecting the horse with canvas when harsh coughing erupted behind him. Spinning around, he found Takina collapsed near the fading fire, perspiration coating her face despite the chill. Her body convulsed with shivers, and those rope marks had become infected and swollen. Reed dropped beside her, palm against her forehead, scorching hot. He worked silently, building the fire higher, boiling water, heating his knife until it glowed orange. Sterilization complete. "Don't move," he said, taking her hand firmly. She clenched her jaw, neck muscles standing out like cords. When the blade opened the poisoned flesh, releasing infection, she released only the faintest sound before silence. Reed cleaned thoroughly, binding everything with dry strips, his touch both firm and surprisingly gentle. Then he positioned her nearer the heat. "Stay by the fire. Warm yourself." Takina obeyed, firelight throwing shadows across taut shoulders and old wounds. A long silence stretched before words came, her voice gravelly and soft. "Men stole me from my home when I was young, traded me from place to place. Every rebellion earned me beatings until I couldn't move." Reed kept his eyes on the flames, saying nothing. "I had a baby sister," Takina went on, darkness flooding her gaze. "They murdered her while I watched. That night, I promised myself I'd never be anyone's captive again." Quiet followed. Only rain's steady rhythm filled the canyon. "I've lost everything as well," Reed admitted, voice like stone dragged through water. "My wife died from sickness. My boy followed not long after. I remained on my land alone for years." They sat facing each other, firelight building a fragile connection between two wounded spirits. No vows were spoken, no contact made, yet quiet understanding began growing between them. When the downpour lessened, Reed spread out a thicker blanket for her. "Sleep. We need to move at first light." Takina pulled it close and nodded once. For the first time since her capture, she slept soundly, nightmares finally silent. Reed watched a moment longer before returning to his post, rifle resting ready. The desert night lay quiet, but this wasn't loneliness anymore. This was something beginning. Dawn broke crimson across the valley. Reed rose early, walking the wagon line to survey their surroundings. In sand still damp from overnight rain, he discovered fresh tracks, deep and evenly spaced. These didn't match his animals. At least 3 others following the same path closely. He knelt, touching the impression. Still moist, meaning passage within recent hours. Returning to camp, he found Takina warming herself at the fire, face still pale with lingering fever. "They're following our trail," Reed stated quietly but with certainty. Takina's grip tightened on her weapon, dark eyes narrowing. "They'll return." Reed studied her carefully. He could abandon this. Let her manage alone, the way survivors often must. But he recognized something unbreakable in her eyes. The same look he'd worn standing at his family's graves, vowing never to submit again. "If you want to keep moving, I'll help," Reed offered. Takina didn't answer immediately. She stood, striding toward the horse with her weapon and gear. "I've run long enough. When they come, I'll be ready." Reed nodded. "Then we prepare." They packed swiftly and departed the canyon before full sunrise. By midday, Reed brought Takina to his property, a worn log structure tucked deep in the grasslands. Livestock shelter, wooden fencing, water storage, everything looked barely sustained through harsh drought. The moment they passed through the gate, Reed began reinforcing everything. Extra locks secured the doors, planks covered windows. Takina helped move dry hay from the house to prevent fire hazards, organizing wood into orderly stacks. That evening, they shared the porch. Reed maintained his Winchester with practiced skill while Takina sharpened her weapon beneath lantern glow. Neither spoke, but the silence between them had transformed. No longer a barrier, it was an unspoken agreement. When trouble arrived, they'd face it united. Far off, a dog's cry echoed from the settlement's direction. Reed glanced at Takina, saw her lift her head, expression calm and resolved. He understood then if they came, this battle would no longer be his alone. "I truly value you being here. If this tale brought back memories of bygone days, dusty twilights and hoofbeats echoing in your soul, please join my channel so we can gather again each day, and I'll share another story from the frontier." The sun blazed overhead, light stabbing like needles against exposed skin. Reed pulled his wide hat lower, calloused hands gripping rusted wire. The north fence had collapsed under winter storms, letting cattle roam freely. Takina approached, carrying a full timber post across her shoulder, as though it were weightless. Muscles rippled along her sun-bronzed arms with each step. She drove the post deep, sweat dripping with every powerful thrust. Reed observed, somewhat startled. This wasn't the fragile soul he'd freed from that dark chamber. This was a warrior, pure and simple. "Watch yourself," he cautioned as wire stretched tight. But Reed was the one who slipped. The twisted metal snapped backward, slashing his wrist. Blood welled from the fresh wound. Takina dropped everything and seized his hand. Her skin felt rough, warm, yet her hold was precise and careful. She pulled him down to sit, tore fabric from her worn leather garment, and bound the injury. Reed began to withdraw, but the intensity in Takina's eyes held him still. No longer guarded something softer, something precious. "You can't handle this alone," Takina said, voice deep and warm. By evening, they'd herded the cattle back to shelter. Smoke from the log house spiraled skyward, merging with deep crimson dusk. Cattle bellowed, dust swirling thick. Amid the chaos, Reed and Takina moved as one, his voice directing, her whip cracking until the herd settled inside, as if guided by single purpose. That night, they sat before the hearth. Wood snapped softly, casting flickering light across their faces. Reed set his Winchester aside and sat in extended silence. Takina sat opposite, her long black hair loose, the braid having come undone. On her scarred, sun-darkened face, her eyes shone with something both determined and tender. Their gazes met. No more doubt, no more hesitation. Only silence so complete, even the wind outside dared not interrupt. Takina leaned forward slightly. Reed did the same. The kiss happened naturally and hurried, unplanned, as though every day before had been leading to this single moment. The scent of smoke, sweat, and earth mingled between them. Words weren't necessary because trust had already been planted, and now it had begun to flourish. The peaceful morning shattered with approaching hoofbeats from the main road. Reed was cutting hay when the old dog howled and charged toward the gate. He squinted into the distance. 5 riders, hats shadowing their faces, revolvers swinging at their sides, rode slowly toward the property. Takina emerged on the porch, weapon ready, her gaze sharp as steel. Reed shook his head slightly, signaling her to hold back, then stepped into the yard with his Winchester. The lead rider, thick-bearded, jerked his chin upward. "Heard you're sheltering an Apache girl? Give her up, and things stay civil." Reed stood firm, hands steady on his rifle. "Nobody here is property you can claim." Another man spat into the dirt and sneered. "Don't be foolish, friend. We paid good money for her. Refuse, and this whole place burns." Reed raised his rifle, barrel catching sunlight. "Cross that gate, and not one of you leaves whole." The air grew heavy. The dog growled low. Wind stirred red dust. The 5 men exchanged glances, then turned their horses. But before departing, the bearded one looked back, voice full of menace. "We'll return. Next time, it won't be just 5. As hoofbeats faded, Takina stepped forward. "They'll bring more. Maybe a dozen." Reed nodded, eyes cold as steel. "Then we make this place a fortress." That afternoon they worked together. Reed stacked sandbags along windows, reinforced every plank on the gate. Takina cleared dry hay from the house, established an escape path out back, and dug spike traps along the fence. Her muscles flexed under the sun, sweat soaking her back, but her face remained fiercely determined. As night fell, the lantern cast their shadows across wooden walls. Reed cleaned his weapons. Takina sharpened her blade. The rhythm of steel and stone wove together like a battle hymn before war. In the silence, Reed spoke. "You can leave if you choose. When they return, it will be blood and fire." Takina looked up, eyes blazing. "I've run enough. This is the first time someone has stood beside me. I'm not leaving again." Reed looked at her, and something stirred in his chest, something warm. Not just duty, but trust. This property, this land, and this woman, they were now things he would defend at all costs. The night was pitch black, thick clouds swallowing the moon. Wind howled over the roof, and the creaking door sounded like a warning. Reed had just dozed off after a long day fortifying the property when the old dog began barking. Not the usual bark for strangers, but something strange, almost mournful. He bolted upright, sharp instinct rising in his chest, stepping into the yard. He saw Takina tall, strong, her muscles defined beneath dim lantern light. She was securing her bag to her back, walking barefoot, and silently toward the back gate. "Stop," Reed's voice rang out, sharp and commanding like a soldier giving orders. Takina froze, shoulders tensed. Then she turned, eyes gleaming with tears. "If I stay, you'll lose everything, the property, the land, maybe even your life." Reed stepped forward, boots splashing into a puddle left by evening rain. "You think I'd let you walk back to those hunting dogs? You think I'd watch them drag you off like some piece of cargo?" Takina's voice cracked as she gripped her weapon. "You don't understand. Since the day I was taken, my blood has cursed everyone around me. If I leave, you'll be safe." Reed moved in close, nearly shouting, his voice raw with fury and pain. "Safe for what? To sit in this house alone? Empty? I'd rather lose everything, this property, this land, than lose you again." Rain broke loose from the heavens, sudden and furious. Takina stood frozen, her fierce eyes softening, trembling. Rain streamed down her bronze face, mixing with a rare tear. She let the bag fall. It hit the mud with a heavy thud. "Why? Why did you choose me?" "I'm abandoned." Marked with shame, Reed didn't answer right away. He set his rifle down, then stepped forward, taking her shoulders in his calloused hands. "Because for the first time in years, when I looked at you, I didn't feel alone anymore." Takina's breath caught, her chest rising and falling. Her large hands gripped his coat tightly. They stood like that in the rain, their breaths mingling. Then, without another word, Reed pulled her into his arms. The embrace was fierce. Both were afraid the other might vanish in the next breath. In the darkness and screaming storm, the promise wasn't spoken aloud. It was made in the way they held each other, desperate and unshakable. They would face the dawn together, no matter how many came for them. At dawn, now the sky burned red as if warning of something ominous. Reed stood on the porch, Winchester fully loaded, eyes locked on the dusty road. Beside him, Takina gripped her weapon, her bare shoulders slick with dew, muscles taut with anticipation. The old dog growled, fur bristling. Hoofbeats thundered like rolling storm clouds from the swirling red dust. Not 5, but more than a dozen riders emerged. They lined up, rifles glinting under the morning sun. The bearded man from before smirked. "We told you we'd return. Now hand her over, or you both die here." Reed stepped down the porch steps, his voice low and steady. "You'll only take her when I fall," the man signaled with a flick of his hand. Gunfire exploded. Window glass shattered. Splinters flew. The dog lunged forward, barking furiously. Reed dropped behind the fence and fired back. One rider tumbled from his horse, blood staining the red dust. Takina didn't retreat. She charged, weapon swinging hard, slamming one man down as he tried to climb the fence. She tore the rifle from his hands, fell back behind the sandbags, and fired, each bullet stopping those who dared come close. Gun smoke clouded the air. Screams, hoofbeats, chaos. A bullet grazed Reed's shoulder. Blood poured, but he didn't flinch. Every shot he took, he made count. One by one, they dropped into the dust. As the raiders finally panicked and pulled back, the bearded man fired one last desperate shot. But Takina was already there, standing on the porch, eyes blazing. She hurled her weapon. Its iron tip struck his gun, sending it flying. He screamed and rode off after the others. The smoke began to clear. All that remained was the pounding of hearts and the sharp stench of gunpowder. Reed leaned on his rifle, breathing hard. Takina stepped to him, her strong hand gripping his shoulder, her gaze full of quiet fire. "They're gone," she said. "We're still here." Reed gave a faint smile. Blood still trickled down, but his eyes held something rare: peace. "Not just still here. We held our ground." They sat on the porch steps, exhausted yet still holding each other. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke, lighting the wooden roof, shining down on two people who had once been alone and were now bound together. The property was no longer just Red's. It was their fortress, now a place they had chosen to defend, to live in, and to love. That evening, Reed leaned against the porch, shoulder bandaged, Takina resting beside him, her wild black hair dancing in the breeze. Before them, the open prairie stretched in calm silence. And in that stillness, something certain echoed: they had found home. "My friends, Bullets and weapons may win you land, but only love and kindness can hold a home together. When a man chooses to stay and a woman chooses to stand beside him, they're not just fighting the storms outside, they're silencing the storm of loneliness within. That is the greatest victory of all. In the end, I wish each and every one of you peace and happiness wherever you may be. I love you all, my dear Frontier Storytelling audience. Let me know how this story touched you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Type 1 if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to join the channel for more gripping stories from the Wild West.